All right. Well, I see that people are still joining us, but we can go ahead and get things going. We're also recording today's session. We've already gotten some inquiries about people that are not able to make it that would like additional information. So just FYI, this will be recorded if you have any colleagues that are missing it today. Welcome to the Colorado Reengagement Network call. Today's topic is graduation guidelines. My name is Julia Hughes. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm the Senior Director of Development and Communications at Colorado Youth for a Change. So thank you all for being here. We're so pleased to be hosting today with Stand for Children and the Center for High School Success. Judith Martinez is here representing Stand for Children and is the Colorado Director of the Center for High School Success. So before I turn it over to Judith, who's also going to introduce our panelists, just wanted to give you a little bit more information about who is on the call with us today, since y'all can't see each other. In doing my best math and analysis on email addresses, I think we have at least 15 school districts from across Colorado on this call today, as well as at least 10 statewide and local education organizations and foundations. So in good company, thank you all for being here. We've got a diverse group, and just thank you all for the support and advocacy provide to Colorado students. Our Colorado Reengagement Network is a statewide effort to share resources and best practices around dropout prevention as well as reengagement. We've already met a couple times this year, and in the fall partnered with Stand for Children again on dropout prevention in the face of a pandemic and what it looked like to come back to school this year and support students both with academic and non-academic needs. And then we met this winter to talk about student mental health and shared some resources there and best practices around how to support students and resources that were out there. So really excited that today's topic is graduation guidelines and really talking about that connection to post-secondary and workforce readiness. The Colorado Department of Education is here. I've seen your slides. They're awesome and thorough and tons of great information for all of us. And then we'll hear from a couple district partners, Adams 12 5-star schools and Inglewood schools, who will really talk about on a district level what it looks like to implement these guidelines and really create pathways for all students. Thank you to those of you that already submitted questions through our registration. We've sent those out to panelists who are going to try to incorporate some of those questions into what they say, but we encourage continued questions throughout the webinar. We've saved time at the end, so feel free to either chat those or use the Q&A function. We'll sort of monitor those and then send those over to panelists near the end. And so one more quick thing, I just have a story from one of our re-engagement specialists that I wanted to share as we kick today off, because I think it's relevant to this topic. In the beginning, I struggled to get in contact with Jay. She would not respond to my calls, so I eventually got in contact with her father, who helped make the introduction. When I asked Jay why she left school before graduating, she said she didn't really even know why she dropped out. But now she was concerned about what type of job she could get without a high school diploma or a GED. She asked if getting a GED was a good idea. So we looked at her transcript and talked to her former counselor about what her options would be. Jay realized that she only had one semester left before graduating. As a result, she was able to get back into school and is graduating at the end of this year. So I like to just ground us in that story, because the right information at the right time is really powerful. And that's what we're here to learn today. And also just reminding us of that connection with one caring adult and what a difference those adults like all of you can make in helping young people navigate that pathway toward graduation. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Judith Martinez. Thank you.
Sharing that story and keeping this work very real, that we're talking about individual people, individual students, even though we're also looking at collective in terms of educational systems. Well, I do want to welcome everyone to today's webinar. We're really happy to have such a diverse group from across the state joining us today. We feel so fortunate to have such a distinguished and accomplished group of colleagues sharing their expertise and insights with us today. Can't wait for you to hear more information about graduation guidelines and then hear direct applications that are occurring from our districts. I also want to give a shout out to all of our colleagues from the Colorado Department of Education who are joining us, as well as those from the Center for High School Success, and specifically want to recognize Gina Iacovetta, one of the coaches with the Center for High School Success, who's been working with Colorado schools, as well as Kate Doran, who is the communication director for Colorado Stand for Children. So fortunate to have them joining us today. So with that, I'm happy to introduce the first portion of today's program, which is that presentation on graduation guidelines. We're so grateful to have Andy Tucker and Robin Russell from the Colorado Department of Education joining us today. They truly are the state's experts on graduation guidelines, so you couldn't ask to have more accomplished folks today. During my tenure at the Colorado Department of Education, I had the opportunity to work with Andy and Robin, so I know firsthand their commitment to providing Colorado school leaders with the resources to support multiple pathways, which many of us on the call are know intimately, and how critical it is in the multiple pathways are in preparing students to be successful in their post-secondary lives. So with that, I want to introduce Andy Tucker. He's the Director of Post-Secondary and Workforce Readiness at the Department of Education. Andy is an educator with more than 20 years of experience. He served as a secondary Spanish teacher, high school counselor, and building and district level administrator. And when Andy has free time, he likes to spend it in the mountains, camping, biking, skiing, and enjoying nature with his wife and his boys, and has a well-loved dog. Some might say spoiled, but I'll say well-loved. Next up, we have Robin Russell, whose title is the Graduation Guidelines Manager. Robin shared that she's had the privilege of working with students, families, and communities in every realm of education, from serving as a French teacher to a fundraiser in education to scholarship administrator and community liaison to a college and career advisor. Currently, Robin's works with district administrators and schools to interpret legislation for graduation guidelines and for ICAPs, the individual career and academic plans. In Robin's free time, she loves to travel to and cook with her large extended family. Okay, so with that, I'm going to pass it on to Andy and Robin. Welcome.
Sorry. We are sorry, we were getting unmuted. Hello, everyone. Oh, it's coming through Robin's computer, so I need to unmute. We're sitting next to each other, so let me unmute so you can see me and not Robin since I'm talking. Hold on. Robin, you mute. I am now. Turn off your speaker. Okay, sorry about that, everybody. Hi. My name is Andy Tucker. It's still seeing you, though, Robin, for some reason, it's showing you. My name is Andy Tucker. You'll see me in a second. I am the director of the Office of Post-Secondary and Workforce Readiness. Thank you so much, Judith, for the kind words and for the warm introduction. Very happy to be here today. So we are here to talk to you today about the power of graduation guidelines. What is graduation guidelines?
What, you know, I'm not sure what's going on here. Andy was talking and here I am. So we're going to move.
We'll go to the next slide. Sorry about this, everybody. Don't know why you're only seeing Robin and not me. We have a question for you. And we want to know what questions you have about graduation guidelines. And so as we're going today, we would love for you all to put your answers. Robin needs to mute and silence her audio. You need to mute. Are you not muted?
I am. Totally look right here. Are you guys having some sound troubles there? What do you hear?
You're not muted. There we go. Now I think you're going to see me. Still not going to me. Can you hear me
Sound
now?
and looks fine. Good. Okay, we see both.
Okay, good. So all I'm seeing is Robin. So sorry about that, everybody. Technical difficulties. You would think after a couple of years we would figure this out. So my apologies. So on that Jamboard that we did, the link that we just posted on the bottom there, we would love for you to post any questions that you have, and we're going to watch that Jamboard as we go. If you've never used a Jamboard before, it's relatively simple. If you get on there, you'll see a little on the left-hand column. You'll see a little sticky note. You fill out one of those sticky notes and you post it. Pretty simple. I think most of us have done a Jamboard before, so we hope that you will add things to the Jamboard as we go. I'll post the link in the chat one more time. There it is. So hopefully you can see it. Please post your questions about graduation guidelines in the chat as we go. We'll try to answer them. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Robin, and hopefully we'll stop having technical difficulties, and you will get to hear, she's going to tell you more about graduation guidelines. You unmute.
Okay, friends. Can everybody hear me? Yes, thank you. Hi. I would love to have the next slide. I'm going to talk about graduation guidelines. And there are people on this call I know who know all about graduation guidelines. And you're going to hear from Diana and Allison a little bit later, and they are two who really do know a lot about it. But every day I learn something new. So I want to go through a little bit of a description of what on earth it is and how it might be something that affects you. And most importantly, how you can use it to help engage students, because it's about the coolest thing ever. So next slide. There is something called the menu of options, and we're going to talk about that. But graduation guidelines is something that was legislated way back in 2008, when there were all sorts of people clamoring at the legislature for kids, people. They needed to fill jobs. This is before the economy, the bottom fell out of the economy. And they were looking for people who could fill all sorts of jobs. And they were looking at what the high school diploma said, and they were looking at students that had, for example, been in 12th grade English, and seeing all sorts of different, a diversity of abilities that were reflected in each of the diplomas, and kind of hard to figure it out. And so a legislature put in place something called graduation guidelines, which was a way for folks from the outside looking in. So looking at each graduate to find out whether that student, that person was ready for the next step. So that's where graduation guidelines came from. And it's been, since 2008, been through various iterations and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people weighing in on what it would look like. And so what this means for career, for the military, in two things: in reading, writing, communicating, and in mathematics. And so each person needs to represent, to show, to demonstrate their abilities in those two areas. Each of you is either connected to a school district or many school districts. Each school district has, or in facility schools or all sorts of other areas, where graduation is something that you are looking into, are responsible for. And the board that, a local school board or a local entity that is your authorizer, has decided which of 11 measures your school district is going to use for graduation guidelines. And so it's established first at the state as legislated, but then each school district gets to decide how they're going to use graduation guidelines. And it's important to know that graduation guidelines begins with individual career and academic planning, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, with the Colorado academic standards, and with a course in civics. Just a quick little aside, there are actually no courses that are legislated except for one semester in civics. and one other little curriculum change that needs to happen. But all the other courses that you have, all the credits that are connected to your districts and to your graduation come from your local school boards and your local community.
Robin, a couple of questions have come in. So one question is grad guidelines required now or is it optional?
Graduation is required now. And I'm going to show you a couple slides ahead about exactly what that means. But every person graduating now in the class of 2022, and if you're familiar with the term anticipated year of graduation, if they've been in high school for 4 years, their anticipated year of graduation is now. And yes, graduation guidelines is in effect.
What about, so last year, schools had the opportunity to use for graduation guidelines something called local measure. They could report that a student graduated via a local measure. Can they still do that?
They cannot. Local measure was decided by the State Board of Education to be just 1 year, and it was based on the fact that assessments were not available during that first year of the pandemic. So students need to demonstrate readiness according to one of the 11 measures. And let's move through the slides so we can kind of see what those are. So starting with this, of the 11 measures, many are traditional measures that you guys have heard of before. They're ones that have been around for a long time, like ACT and SAT. Likely every single person in the room took one of those tests to get admitted to college. It includes AP and IB, advanced placement, and international baccalaureate assessments, not the courses themselves, but the assessment that the student takes. It includes AccuPlacer, which is a placement test for community colleges. It includes concurrent enrollment, which is college level courses where you can get high school credit. It includes ASVAB, which is the test for the military, and ACT Work Keys, which is an assessment that measures readiness for careers and work. A quick aside for that one is ACT Work Keys is the test that they give most paras in school. Many school districts use the ACT Work Keys assessment to figure out where students are ready to take a para job, for example. Next slide. There are also performance measures, and these are ones that are not necessarily stop in time, take the test on that day. So there is something called district capstone, which it is one of the most exciting and certainly one of the measures that people have the most questions about is what is a capstone? What does it look like? We're going to talk a little bit about that. And we've got some resources at the end of the slideshow about that. But essentially, capstone is a portfolio and or a presentation. It is based on everything from projects. If you imagine a continuum where it's one student who does a capstone or every single person 9th through 12th grade does a capstone in a school, 178 districts have lots of different ways that capstone looks. And again, this is district decided. I am the capstone police. I'm the graduation guidelines police, which means my job is to support you, not to tell you that you're doing it right or wrong, and to help you find some resources. Industry certificates are certifications that are business approved, industry approved certifications. So for example, a certified nurse's assistant, CNA, is a certification. There are welding certifications, automotive certifications, many, many, many technical certifications in computer fields. So these are certifications that each district decides, and they are ones that it has to be the district to decide. So it's not a CTE certificate. It is a certification that comes from industry or business. And then finally, standards-based or collaboratively developed standards-based performance assessments are state conversations about what a performance assessment should look like, could look like. So whereas district capstone is something that's decided at the district level, the performance assessment is something that's a conversation that's going on around the state. There are lots of ways for you to join what those are. Andy, there are some questions that we want to go with.
So one question is, how does student mobility impact meeting graduation requirements or grad guidelines?
So mobility affects so many things, not just graduation guidelines, as you know. one of the things that we're trying to do with graduation guidelines is allow and ask districts to report how students are graduating. So each district has to tell us which English and which math measure the student has met. And the more the districts report to the state, the easier it is for us at the state level to be able to help individual school districts find which student has met which measure. So how does mobility fit in there? The more that we know from each other about what we're doing and about how that student has graduated, the better chance we have of building a complete picture of where that student is moving. Let me just go on quickly through the next couple of slides, and then we can keep getting to some questions. I just wanted to tell you that for those of you who know and have been working with graduation guidelines a long time, it's important to know that reading, writing, and communicating is one measure and math is the other. This used to say English and math, but it's important for everybody to understand that the standards at the state are reading, writing, and communicating. They better match what the state standards are. And this opens up some doors for you at each community to figure out whether some of the measures that the students are working on, they could be in native languages, they could be in world languages. So AP Japanese could potentially count for this if your district agrees to it, or a capstone that's in Swahili. So this is an implication of allowing this to be reading, writing, and communicating. And we are gathering a committee of people starting next year to talk about what this means and to build all sorts of examples of what this looks like. Next slide. There's also, I told you that there's one legislated course in civics, and that's the only course that's legislated. There is a new legislative piece that's not a whole course, but each school needs to embed genocide and Holocaust studies into a curriculum in one of the classes that you teach between 9th and 12th grade. It says beginning in July 2023. I want to make sure you know that that could be your 9th graders that come in 2023, and that group needs to have at least one semester of genocide and Holocaust studies curriculum embedded by the time they graduate. So that gives lots of years for us to work on this particular thing. And again, there's some resources that you can find there. Next slide. Here's some important things. There is at the top of the menu of options a paragraph that talks about accommodations for English learners, for students with disabilities, and for gifted students. You as a district have the ability to accommodate for any of these groups of students. And this is a cascading slide. So if you could click on the next. So in there, we also have, and also listed at the bottom, and by the way, you're going to get these slides later so you can access all of these. There are some practices and some guidance that a giant committee of people has talked about about what this means. But bottom line, every student needs to graduate according to one of the graduation guidelines measures. English learners, students with disabilities, gifted students, every single person needs to graduate according to graduation guidelines. And so we build all sorts of resources for you to begin to access that. And Capstone, brilliantly, is one of the best ways for any of those students to demonstrate with meaning what they know and can do. Next slide. Someone asked about graduation and what goes into effect this year. This is it. So any student that has an anticipated graduation year of 2022 or beyond needs to meet graduation guidelines competencies. Students who are fifth-year students, in other words, their anticipated graduation guidelines year was 2021. They also need to meet graduation guidelines this year, but not Ascent students or 6th and 7th year seniors or students in transition who already graduated. So those of you who counted your transition students as four-year graduates, then they do not need to be graduation guidelines. If you guys have questions about any of these things that I say, and we didn't get a chance to answer your question, we'll have our contact information at the end, and we'd love to hear from you. Next slide. So I'm going to turn it back to Andy, and we're going to talk about the ways that you can help leverage graduation guidelines for student engagement?
Thanks, Robin. I'm going to answer a couple of other questions that have come up in the chat too while we go. And there's a question that is in the Q&A that maybe we can answer. Well, I'll just answer now to add some clarity here. The question in the question and answer section is, so each school can decide how they get to their English and math score. So one school could require 3 years of math and another 2, as long as they meet the scores. Graduation guidelines is not about credits. That's not what it's about. As a matter of fact, graduation guidelines could be as broad and could be as flexible as a district chooses to make it. Credits are the district's graduation requirements. They have local control over setting credit requirements. They don't have to. Realistically, a student could graduate having taken a course in civics and ultimately a course that includes genocide and Holocaust studies, and having met an item on the menu. Just those things could, as far as the state is concerned, could lead to a student graduating. Credits have always been the local determination of a school district. So to answer that question, yes. In one district, and it's always been this way, right? I mean, for example, and I'm just going to pick on Englewood and Adams 12 since they're here. Englewood might have a graduation requirement of 3 years of math, whereas Adams 12 might have a graduation requirement of 4 years of math, and it's always been that way. It would continue to be that way, but now they must embed graduation guidelines as their minimum floor graduation requirements for every student in the state, with the credits added above determined at the local level. The next one, and Robin, maybe you can even help me here, is what is the most commonly used graduation guideline? Well, we've only collected the data, had required collection once, and that was last year when local measure was one of the options. For last year, local measure was the most common measure, followed by SAT, which isn't terribly surprising given that all students take the SAT in their junior year. So many students did that. And then followed by capstone and others. It was pretty spread out beyond those top 2. And so we will know much more after this year's graduating class when it's the full first year of implementation of graduation guidelines. And so what we've talked about so far is kind of just the nuts and bolts of grad guidelines. What is it? Where did it come from? But really, what we want to talk about is how it can be a motivator and how it can be something that, the story that Julia told at the beginning, how can we serve students better with the flexibilities that exist within grad guidelines? I mean, we believe that if you see it, you can be it. And so it helps students to explore their possibilities. We believe that grad guidelines in the absence of ICAP is not as effective. An effective grad guidelines implementation will include a robust ICAP process that will help students. And for those of you that may not know, ICAP is the individual career and academic planning process. And I'm sure that Diana and Allison are going to talk about this, or I hope so, as they jump in a little bit. But ICAP is so vital because this is about meeting each individual student's goals. It's about helping them determine who they want to be, what they want to do, and how they can get there. And the way they demonstrate their post-secondary and workforce readiness via the grad guidelines menu should align with their interests, should align with their ICAP, and all of those sorts of things. So with that being said, in the Jamboard, on the next page of the Jamboard, if you want to jump over to the next page of the Jamboard, you'll see that, and thank you, Robin, for posting in the chat again, you will see that in that Jamboard, the second page is, what are you doing now? If you would hit the animation, please. If you would, what strategies do you all currently have in place in the schools where you work, and the districts where you work, to engage students to help them and demonstrate their post-secondary and workforce readiness that could ultimately lead to them meeting one of the graduation guidelines measures? So we would love to see some of those thoughts on that Jamboard. You can post them in the chat too if you would prefer. Either way works for us. Next slide, please. So what this kind of gets to is right now, I mean, realistically with grad guidelines, and we understand this, it's a major policy shift, right? Very, very large policy shift for folks around the state, and for districts, for schools, for school personnel, and for folks who work in schools to support students. So we recognize fully that right now, a lot of people are in the compliance place, right? They're in a place where they're like, oh my gosh, how are we going to make sure that our graduation rate, that four-year graduation rate doesn't drop? And how are we going to make sure that these students get to walk across the stage and get their diploma? So we're stuck in that compliance place, and it makes sense right now. But hopefully what we're able to determine, what we're able to get out of this is some meaning too. The meaning behind graduation guidelines, as I discussed a minute ago, is really about meeting each individual student's unique interests, unique goals, and helping them along that path. Robin and I often talk about how all students are career bound. Every student is career bound. College is an appropriate, excellent step for the vast majority of students, but some sort of post-secondary education for all students. But not all students are college bound. All students are career bound. And many of them will have a stop on the pathway to career that will include post-secondary education or college. So that's really what post-secondary and workforce readiness is about. So if you'd hit, there's animations here, if you would mind clicking, please. So again, this is talking about ICAP. This is really about having meaningful career conversations with students. It's about providing students with those opportunities to speak with trusted adults and others in their buildings, including all of you on this call, about what it is and who they're going to be and who they want to become and how they can get there. In those links on the slides, you'll find tons of resources about how to help students, how to have a more robust and meaningful ICAP process. For different practices that students, that schools and districts have shared with us, that we to share with you to build in better, robust processes for ICAP to ultimately make graduation guidelines in these different pathway options more meaningful for you and for students. With that, I'll turn it back over to Robin.
So go ahead and hit one more animation. There we go. We're going to stay on this slide, actually, if you wouldn't mind going back one. I just also put in that there are some resources that I think you really, for those of you who aren't familiar with ICAP, we have something called a Power Playbook and Power Practices, Tools, and Resources, and just a way for you to think about how can you help a student have a meaningful career conversation, and what does planning look like in your district or your school? How does it work? And the idea is that you're building a team, family, peers, mentors, coaches, like all of these people, the adult that Judith talked about, who is that meaningful person in each student's lives that helps the student understand and build strengths and challenges? What is it I want to do next? How do I know? What am I good at? What are the strategies that I have for getting there? And how do I know, my gosh, if I can financially afford it? So those are the pieces of what ICAP looks like. And we just want to make sure that you walked away with some resources there. And then next slide. Compliance versus meaning. This is something that everyone is struggling with this year, because this is the year that we have to finally all meet graduation guidelines. And districts are coming up against this deadline, and they're really feeling like, oh my gosh, we've got to get this done. How many people can we throw in to take the ASVAB? Quick, let's everybody do ACT work keys. And I think that there's been a lot of frustration, but also and push for compliance. And ultimately, what we're really looking for, the students, is meaning in things that are happening. So we hope that you'll be able to use graduation guidelines as a lever, as a different way of looking at education, which you are already all doing anyway, and think about the ways that students can meaningfully pursue one of these measures, or two or three of them, starting in 9th grade, starting younger. And so these are just some of the ways. And actually, Diana Zackham is on the call, and I often quote her. She said, Robin, we are building meaning into everything that we're doing now. And that's what I hope you're doing, is that for students and for you, the schools and districts, that you will understand that that's where we are. So we are kind of done with our time here. If you would continue to add your questions to the Jamboard and also talk about your strategies, I would like to just go through each, while Andy's looking up the questions and the strategies. Could you move through the slides slowly and let me show you the many, many resources that are on here? So next slide is promising practices for capstone, for students with disabilities and who need accommodations, for English learners, how CTE fits into the process of graduation guidelines and performance assessments, what they look like and what a PLC looks like. Next slide. On the graduation guidelines main page, you'll see some blue buttons. Each button is a way for you to find the guidance and promising practices for each measure. Next slide. Again, they're the little blue buttons again, but you also have a quick link for graduation guidelines, for the menu, for guidance, for some industry certificates, where there's an incentive program called Career Development Incentives, where you could get money for the students who have received industry certificates. And that's something that's really great. Next slide. Our office has a resource page where you can find out who's working on every single thing that we do. And so that's kind of a fun resource. And then finally, our last slide before we turn it over is our contact information. I'm Robin. You heard from Andy. And the reason I put Reagan Ward on there is that she's the person who's working on the data side of this. So those of you who are data responders or who are responsible for data in your district and getting that to CDE, Reagan is like the most fantastic partner that we have. So she's a great person to talk to. So that is our presentation, and we are thrilled to have been invited. Thank you so much. And Andy's got a couple questions.
So I will share with you all, there's a lot of great, on the Jamboard, there are a lot of great practices that people are already doing. I'm seeing certifications, people offering ACE programs, that's a CTE program for students with disabilities, and all kinds of other things. So I would encourage you to look at the Jamboard to see some of the things that folks are doing. I'm noticing that people are putting in the chat, there are lots of great resources. Yes, Robin is amazing at finding great resources and finding the best promising practices out there. So please, 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 when you get this slide deck, click through some of those resources. If you're looking for ways to do capstone, if you're looking for ways to do different types of, some of these different graduation guidelines practices, there's a wealth of information on our website. Finally, one of the last question I wanted to make sure we answered that came off the Jamboard is, for students who are behind on credits due to the pandemic or many other reasons, it seems like capstone might be the best answer for them. And I would say that capstone is a common tool that folks are using for students that are struggling to meet graduation requirements, but it's not the only one, right? Because again, we want to make this meaningful for each individual student. So those students may have earned an industry certification during their time in high school. I mean, remember, this is about post-secondary and workforce readiness. What shows that you're workforce ready more than having earned a certification that the workforce values? So there may be a variety of different ways to engage students, but capstone is certain. With that, that's the end of our time. Thank you so much. You're going to hear from two experts in the field next, and Diana and Allison. They are great colleagues of ours who we know well. And so thank you. Thanks for your time. Thanks for letting us be here.
Diana, why don't we turn it over to you first, and we'll go back into the slide deck.
Okay.
If that works.
Great.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. Well, hello, everyone. I'm Diana Zackham, and I am the Director of Secondary Support for the Inglewood School District. And I was going to share with you, I think, three structures that we are using in Inglewood to help support student success. And I'm going to define student success in this context as both with graduation guidelines, but then also with overall student engagement. So the first strategy I wanted to share with you is this graphic that we created to really help students select the grad guidelines menu option that best fits their plan for life after high school. So you'll see that we aligned each of the menu options with either the workforce pathway, a post-secondary college pathway, or a military pathway. And we really created this graphic, I think, with three things in mind. First is we really didn't want any one particular menu item to be branded as the option for students who couldn't meet one of the other proficiencies. So for example, we were trying to be very, very intentional to be able to show that capstone could be used in any of these pathways. It wasn't just for students who couldn't pass the SAT. So there was a lot of intention around identifying the menu options and tying them with the post-secondary pathway in a very kind of universal and holistic way. I mean, what we really were hoping to do is to really show that these menu options are vehicles for helping our students meet, helping our students execute on that plan for life after high school. The second thing that we were keeping in mind with this graphic is that we really wanted to give our counselors and our students, our parents and families, a tool so that they could have a productive conversation around selecting the grad guidelines menu that best fit their students' goals. I mean, we wanted there to be a very intentional connection between grad guidelines and the students' ICAP. And then the third thing is that we really wanted to show that the menu, that many of these demonstrations were aligned to more than one pathway. We really felt that, for example, students that were interested in going into the military, that the SAT could actually really help them with that as well. And so we were really trying to show that there was a lot of flexibility in the demonstrations to be able to support students in their plans. Okay, I think the overall goal here is that with this strategy and the graphic, we're trying to increase the relevance of the grad guidelines menu, and then we truly believe that obviously increased relevance supports increased student engagement. We can go to next slide. So our second strategy was really grounded in career and technical education. So in Inglewood, we have always felt that CTE was a really critical student engagement strategy. So we've been trying to leverage CTE to support grad guidelines and keeping our students in school. So I'm sure you will all recognize this graphic as the Colorado Career Cluster Model. So what we did is we actually adapted the graphic to include all of our CTE offerings, career and technical education offerings that we offer in district, and then also those of our partnering school districts. We are very fortunate to be in a career and technical education consortium where Inglewood students can access CTE programs at our neighboring school districts in Cherry Creek, in Sheridan, in Littleton. And so this graphic really captures all of the CTE offerings that our students can access. We've used this graphic for many years as part of our ICAP process and as part of registration, but now we're really recognizing that it's powerful in helping students navigate grad guidelines as well. So in this graphic, we're using it to show not only courses that align with their interest and their ICAP, but also courses that offer concurrent enrollment, courses that offer industry certifications, and then we're working to add courses that are piloting standards-based performance assessments. So this, one graphic is kind of a nice catch-all for a lot of the ways that students can access those grad guidelines demonstrations. And then next slide, thanks. All right, so the final strategy is around GED. And as many of you have probably experienced as well, we have had a dramatic increase in students who want to pursue their GED. In fact, our enrollment has actually tripled since the beginning of the pandemic. So, but before I dive into the strategy, I just want to note that it's important to understand that GED is not on the graduation guidelines menu, but I did want to share the strategy with you as a way to be able to keep students engaged and or to re-engage students and kind of share this creative strategy that we are piloting right now to actually get students to a high school diploma. So we are fortunate we are fortunate to partner with Littleton, Jeffco, and Zero Dropouts to offer our students a GED program that allows them to remain enrolled under the K-12 umbrella. They do not have to drop out of school in order to access GED support. So in the program is called Next, And so in the Next GED program, students are able to access GED prep classes, and then they also receive robust mental health and kind of wraparound services. But kind of the magic here is that because they're still under that K-12 umbrella, they can also access concurrent enrollment and career and technical education courses that help connect them to the next step. And then so you'll start to see the thread with grad guidelines. And then I guess because of the increase in GED, we have recently found ourselves in a situation where we have GED completers who actually want to return to high school to earn a traditional high school diploma. And as many of you may or may not know, under state law, students under the age of 21 who have completed their GED can return to their high school to work on a high school diploma. So our board has adopted some new language in our graduation policy to help support students who want this option. And I'll share with you what this looks like. And we can go to the next slide. All right, so this strategy that we are really implementing for the first time this year is that our board adopted a policy that allows students who have earned their GED to re-enroll in a district high school to be able to work on that traditional high school diploma. And so the first thing that we have done is our board decided that because we truly recognize the rigor of the GED, that we said if students had demonstrated proficiency and passed that GED test, we did not feel it was necessary for them to come back and take those traditional core content classes. So for example, if a student passes the English test, all remaining English course requirements and credits would be waived. And so if a student had passed all of the GED, basically we would come in, do a transcript analysis, and then waive their English, math, social studies, and science credits. However, that's not enough to be able to get the high school diploma. Students still must complete all remaining course and credit requirements to be able to truly earn that traditional high school diploma. So that includes PE and health, academic electives, and so forth. And then the third component is if they want to receive a traditional high school diploma, they still must complete and meet all of the grad guidelines proficiencies, and then any other requirements such as ICAP, community service, and then our alternative high school does have additional proficiency requirements. So our last slide just kind of gives you an example of what this might look like. The first column on the left, that lists the credit types that students are required to earn to get an Inglewood diploma. We have two high schools, Inglewood High School, which is EHS, and Colorado's finest high school of choice, which is that third column. And this just shows how those credit requirements lay out. But then should a student earn their GED, if you want to click, this is an animated slide. If the student earns their GED, this indicates what credits would be waived. And then one more animation. And then students would still be required to complete all of those other course and credit requirements. We are in a situation where we currently have one student that is pursuing this right now, and we have at least one additional student who we are anticipating will be joining us in the fall to pursue this same option and really leveraging our career and technical education programs to be able to help them meet that next step. And again, many of our CTE options connect with grad guidelines and help students meet their proficiencies through industry certifications. So I did want to share just kind of, this is a unique thing that we are trying out this year with the support of our school board to really help students we're really trying to live out our mission of this multiple pathways to a high school diploma. And this is one of the ways that we are trying to do that.
Credits for an exam.
So thank you for the opportunity to share 3 of these strategies that we are trying out here in Inglewood, and happy to answer any questions that anyone may have. I think after Allison maybe presents.
Julia, should I go for it?
Yes, thank you.
Yep. Diana, that was great. I will build off of some things that you shared. First, I want to introduce myself. My name is Allison Lucero Hoffman, and I'm the Director of Counseling in Adams 12 5-star schools. And I'm joined here by Liesl Reed, who is also with Adams 12 5-star schools. And we're going to I'm going to hand off to her after I speak a little bit about grad guidelines and some of the work, a lot of the work that we've done over the past, I'd say 3 to 5 years to really prepare for grad guidelines and what it's done for us. And then Liesel's going to really talk about some of the impact that there were some questions about both the pandemic or grad guidelines, what it's having for some of our unaccompanied homeless youth, some of our foster youth, students with high mobility, around attendance, lots of factors. So Liesel is going to really dive into that and address some of those things. So in terms of grad guidelines, I think that I didn't prepare any slides, so I'm just going to chat and really open to questions. But the list of measures that the state introduced really forced Adams 12 to look at a couple of things. What measures we already were including, what measures that we wanted to grow. And one of the first things that we really put into place was some changes within our counseling curriculum. And Diana alluded to many of those things and showed some of the resources and tools that her team is using probably daily within their offices and in their practices. When you really try and tease out for students the difference between credit attainment and the grad guidelines around the competency, it really forced a lot of our counselors to look at our counseling curriculum and look at the best ways to really advise students about these two measures and have them support them in preparing and planning for their future. And so one of the first things we did is add into our counseling curriculum a mandatory one-on-one 10th grade meeting. It's really common for seniors to have a one-on-one meeting before they leave, but it wasn't as common for, especially at a large comprehensive high school, for every single 10th grader to meet with their counselor one-on-one. And so that was one of the very first things that we implemented. And now students do a one-on-one meeting with their counselor at the 10th, 11th, and 12th grade level, in addition to classroom lessons. And so that advising really happens a lot in a one-on-one meeting to ensure that a student has credits, but also has a well thought out plan, as Andy and Robin talked about, that it's not just a hoop that you jump through, but rather, are you projected to have an SAT score that's going to meet the grad guidelines? If so, let's talk about that and where that's going to lead you. If not, let's talk about why that is and potentially what work you can do around your SAT score and how that competency can help you in your future, or what other measures there are. It's made for, I just think, some really rich advising conversations. As a district, we took this opportunity to expand our offerings to students. We have we've had for many, many years, a very robust CTE programming in the district. And so, and AP programming. It's really forced us to look more at our concurrent enrollment offerings outside of CTE and look at what sorts of CE concurrent enrollment offerings we can expand in our schools and how that would really support students who aren't maybe an AP student, but could benefit more from a concurrent enrollment programming, and how that could impact them to successfully complete a graduation guideline. In addition, we've done a lot of work to build out a capstone. For the past several years, we offered a capstone in conjunction with a nonprofit organization in Colorado. And it's been very successful, but this summer we're developing our own capstone program, really built upon the Collaborative of Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning standards, CASEL. Many of you are familiar with CASEL, really looking at the CASEL competencies and how can we take the performance measure of capstone and build it out as a class. Right now it's a class within Adams 12, to really provide an alternative way for students to meet their grad competencies. With a real emphasis that it's not just for students who can't meet a grad competency through SAT, but it really could be beneficial for lots of students in our system, depending on what they have going on as an additional elective class to take and potentially grad guideline. The last measure that we really dug into as a district was work keys. A lot of students in our district have an opportunity to take work keys through their participation in our CTE programming. But we've expanded that to allow other students to obtain that certificate if it was a good way for them to meet grad guidelines. I was looking at some of our data this morning to prepare for today's meeting. And, this was a question that was asked earlier, and Andy and Robin don't have access to this data quite yet, although Andy alluded to being really curious to see this data this summer and be able to dig into the first year of grad guidelines. In Adams 12, I can share that right now, the majority of our 12th graders in our system are meeting both of their grad competencies through SAT. Not the majority of our 12th graders, I'm sorry. The biggest competency that students are meeting it through is SAT. And that of course varies at every school, but I would say that SAT is the number one way that students have met English or math, followed by work keys, about 17 to 20%, depending on whether it's English or math, of our students have met a grad competency through work keys. And our third highest is through capstone. So that class that we developed is hitting about 10% of our students are meeting one of the grad competencies through capstone. And as I was just looking through the data, I was excited as we've built out systems for each of the schools to look at which students have met grad competencies and how. At the end of this year, principals and counseling teams are going to have a lot more data to look through around which of their students met the math competency through SAT versus work keys, through concurrent enrollment, through industry certificate, in addition to English. And I think it'll just give another picture for principals, for schools, as they look at data to really explore how are our students meeting these grad competencies, not in a way as a ding of we need to increase the number of students meeting it through SAT, but really to look at this well-rounded picture of who our student body is and where they are going after school. And how does that really change the picture of what we're doing as a school system to prepare our students? Many schools are looking at grad profiles now, and we have one school in particular who's really working on creating a graduation profile for their students or for their school, of really looking at what are some of the essential skills that this school, Mountain Range High School, for instance, graduates their students with. And I think that the percent of students who complete different grad competencies is just another layer of data of knowing who is in our community, who's in our school community, and what are our values as a community around preparing our students for where they go after high school. So, Liesl, do you want to talk a little bit about some of our most at-risk students? When I look at our data, we have about 10% of our students right now, current 12th graders, 1 month left to go before graduation. After all of the work that our counselors and our teachers and admin are doing to ensure that students have both credits and the competencies to walk across that stage, we have about 10% of students who still haven't met one of our grad competencies. And a lot of students who got through a test or got through a measure, but we know it took a lot of work to do that. And so Liesl's going to talk a little bit about some of our more marginalized students and the work it might take.
Thanks, Allison. Well, there are two people on the call I noticed in the participants that really have a huge part to play, and that's Maria Tovar, who's our student re-engagement specialist, and Greg Morales, who's our unaccompanied homeless youth advocate. So it's been stated many times that the connection with a trusted adult in the building cannot be overstated. And in this case, it's not just that, but we have Greg, who's forming relationships with our most highly impacted unaccompanied homeless youth, who were very much impacted by the pandemic in terms of disengaging from school and also having to work because they support themselves financially. So having Greg on board, he's not only been able to form those relationships, but also help be creative, get in the creative space with helping students overcome barriers to getting to school. If they can't go to school, they can't graduate. So he's been able to problem solve around barriers that include transportation, and then barriers that sometimes we don't think about. He makes sure that that seniors know that they're going to get a cap and gown, that they're going to get a yearbook, that they are going to have access to an experience similar to their housed peers. And just knowing that has kept kids in the game, and made them feel like, yes, I'm going to graduate. Greg has also really facilitated connections with our CTE school counselors. Just yesterday, he got an email, I'll get a little emotional, that he got one of the, we held them UHY, into the law enforcement class for next year, which is a very highly sought after class. But he reached out to the counselor and explained, you know, how important it was to this very at-risk young lady, who also has her trusted adult in the building is a school resource officer. So the school counselor, you know, really put some thought into it and made sure that this young woman can attend that class next year. And that's the kind of thing that puts kids not only across the finish line, but it's been a real point of emphasis for our program that we're not just getting kids to the finish line, but we're helping them figure out what to do after they cross that finish line. And so without Greg's creativity and help in that area, I don't think that we could make that possible for our UHY. And then we also have a dedicated child welfare education liaison in our office, and she happens to be a McKinney-Vento liaison as well. And so she's been working really hard with the foster youth. And foster youth who age out then typically become unaccompanied homeless youth. And so she and Greg have worked really closely together to make sure that those students aren't falling through the cracks when they age out. So I think it's just about being creative and really filling in what seem like really small gaps, but for a kid, a student, a young adult is huge. And then I think our relationships with our education foundation have been just invaluable. Because our Ed Foundation has an emphasis on CTE, but also because we can go to the Ed Foundation. We had a student last year whose car was broken into, UHY, all of his tools were stolen for the job that keeps him with not really even a roof over his head. He's a couch surfer, but keeps him fed and keeps him able to keep going. And it was one call to the foundation, and they were able to find a donor to replace all of those tools with high quality tools, the brand names. So, and then really just having plans. So the pandemic hit everyone hard. It hit us very hard. We went from an all-time high of graduating UHY to a very low percentage. And right away, Greg leapt in. He grabbed that list of students that had not graduated in 4 years. And he looked at what kind of credits do they have. And he had a kid graduated in December. So again, I think young adults get in a position maybe where they feel that they are frustrated, or they don't know even how close they are to getting there. And so we are getting them to where they need to be. And then we have a mentorship program that really, kicked into gear this year. But we are able to pair at-risk students, including highly mobile students, with a trusted adult of their choice in the building. And part of that mentorship program is that the students at the beginning take a self-assessment, and it helps them understand where they're at in terms of social emotional competencies, goal setting, and there's a lot of post-secondary exploration. So those are really some of the things we've been doing at Adams 12 to try to get through those barriers. And I see Elena Shaw is on the call as well, and she's been really amazing helping us get AmeriCorps members. Not this year, there weren't any available, but I can say the one we had last year was so amazing that she is now on our staff. We were able to hire her. So having those extra people pay attention to attendance as well is really important.
Thank you so much. I love the personal stories and bringing it down to one student and that one adult that takes note and takes action. We've got about 10 minutes left, and actually CDE had a ton of questions and they also did a great job taking them as we went along. I've also seen some questions answered in the chat. But Judith, I'll turn it over to you for the question around was it absenteeism and re-engagement?
Right, and I think first of all, thanks to our distinguished presenters. Thanks so much. I've already received several texts just from some of the Center for High School Success partners wanting to make sure that they'll be able to get access to the links of the information that was shared. And it was also so helpful to hear the role of local control. We hear that in the state, but how it impacts it. That a district, that Inglewood, has been able to make some decisions at the local level that make the most sense for their students was very inspiring to some outside of the Denver metro area to think about how they might influence what's occurring at their local level in terms of graduation guidelines or setting grad requirements. But I'll move it along. So one of the questions that came in with the registration was related to attendance. It was noted that attendance is the worst, that after the last couple of years, compulsory attendance seems optional to some folks. So how can we address that, and how are we addressing it? I'll share some things that I've learned along the way, but also some things that are showing promise with some of the Center for High School Success schools who have attendance rates overall of 85% or higher, kind of the common themes. And the themes are true during a pandemic and were true pre-pandemic. Essentially, the strategies are around relationship building, partnering with family and community about the importance of school attendance, as well as creating those structures and systems and fostering a climate where students are welcomed. So what does that look like? In terms of engaging with families and communities, that when a student isn't attending or you haven't seen them, reaching out to family members. That strategy is very effective, especially with some of our Latino families. And what I'm basing that on is when I was at the Department of Education, we did a closer look at GED test takers. And the GED test takers were asked, why did they return to take their GED? And the number one answer among our Latino males was that their parents or an aunt or an uncle or a family member had encouraged them to do so. So the role of family cannot be underestimated. So very important that the outreach to students needs to begin with the family members all along the way, or somebody who is connected. Maybe it's not but somebody who the student identifies as a caring adult in their life and enlisting them in the support. The other thing that's been really important is to have the discussion about why a student is not attending. We have so many students who are not attending, so doing that one at a time is challenging, but getting student voice, hosting a focus group with some students who to find out why students aren't coming to school. If they're working, are there options to have more flexible schedules, for example? So I think that post-pandemic, or maybe want to post-vaccination, let's say, and booster, having those conversations about what flexible schedules look like to support students in meeting their home obligations as well as their educational obligations. But again, that relates to working with family and community. So those are just some snapshots of things that we've talked about with some of the Center for High School Success folks. And relationship building, I mean, it can be a card, a home visit, just a way to be consistent in a student's life. I'm gonna I see some nods heading. I don't know, Liesl or Diana or Robin, Andy, or Allison, if you have anything that you'd like to add around attendance. And I'm going to put a resource in the chat.
I can share kind of shortly, briefly what Inglewood is doing here. We have, I think we try to approach attendance in two different ways. One's kind of the proactive approach, which is really focused on, you know, just as you mentioned, Judith, building relationships. And that really comes in the form of our seminar classes or our family classes, as we called it, our alternative high school, where there's a caring adult attached to a group of students that's really supporting those students and monitoring them. Also, our traditional high school has implemented a 9th grade support class that we're really hoping to front load you know, success strategies for students. And then, you know, certainly relevance is another proactive strategy, helping students find the hook of, you know, why does school matter? What classes can I take that are going to help me meet my goals? And so just as I spoke about, you know, we have CTE, concurrent enrollment, industry certifications, things that really get students excited about their learning. And then, of course, just as you mentioned, Judith, we have very high attendance problems, you know, low attendance rates right now. And so that just comes in with real-time interventions with attendance committees at the school where they're doing, you know, outreach, phone calls, home visits, and so forth. And then we've also leveraged Colorado Youth for a Change to be able to have AmeriCorps members who are doing attendance outreach at our schools. And then also we partner with CYC to have a re-engagement specialist. So when we do have students that have really extended absences and are showing up on our dropout list, that we actually have immediate outreach to those students to try to get them back in.
Great. Diana, thanks for sharing that. Julia?
Diana, I was going to add too with the AmeriCorps piece, we're recruiting host sites for the fall. And so when we send follow-up information, if you're interested in placing an AmeriCorps member at your high school to support those students that are not attending and that really need that one-on-one support, we'll have a link there for more information. So thank you for including that. I think I'll probably wrap us up at this point because we're at about time, but thank you to all of our panelists. Super helpful information. Appreciate your time, especially given this crazy time of year as school wraps up. And we'll be sure for anyone that registered for the webinar to send these follow-up slides and some of these additional resources that were shared today. So thank you all. Have a great rest of the day. Thank you, Julia,
for organizing us and partnering with Center for High School Success and Stand for Children. Appreciate it. It's so great to see everyone. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Everybody. Bye.
Thank you all.